Hello, this is In Conservation With. My name is David Lindo, also known as the Urban Birder. Today, we are going to be exploring the world of finches and being more precise, finches of the USA and Canada, with two good friends and very good people, Lillian Stokes and Matt Young, to his friends. Before I go any further, I just want to say that today uh, the show has been sponsored by Cower Sporting Optics, and basically they are the manufacturers of the world-renowned Promenade series spotting scopes, and also Birds, Wildlife and Nature, the tour company that strives to deliver the best birding and wildlife watching throughout the world. So thank you guys for sponsoring. Okay, let me quickly introduce you to my guests. Maybe just say hello one at a time. Firstly, Lillian, ladies first, Lillian Stokes. She is an award-winning author, photographer who produced 35 Stokes guides, of which this is one, with her husband Don, selling over 5 million copies, including the best-selling The Stokes Field Guides to the Birds of North America. In fact, I think I've got that book when I was a kid, actually. Um, and the what else is there? The Stokes Field Guide to Birds of Eastern and Western regions, and the Stokes Beginner's Guide to Birds, the Stokes Nature Guides, and the Stokes Backyard Nature books. Lillian is also the producer and co-host of two PBS birdwatching TV series seen by 40 million viewers nationwide. She's amazing, this woman, isn't she? Um,
Yeah.
other achievements include being named a federal duck stamp judge. I'll ask her about that in a sec. I don't know what that is. And receiving a Partners in Flight National Conservation Award and a Kappa Kappa Gamma Lifetime Achievements Award. Lillian is one of the board members, or on the board of directors, should I say, of the Hawk Migration Association of North America. So, firstly, Lillian, hello. How are you, and where are you?
Hello, it's an honor to be here. I'm thrilled. I'm fine, and I am at my house right now in in the suburbs of Boston, Massachusetts.
Okay, that's Eastern US for those who are not there. Um, Quickly tell me, what is this federal duck stamp judge thing? What's that?
Well, as you know, the federal duck stamp is a very important, actually, conservation thing, because if you're a hunter, you need to buy a federal duck stamp each year. But there's also a big movement to get birders buying the federal duck stamp, because the funds from that go to protect bird habitat, especially sort of, waterfowl and wetland sorts of habitat, a high percentage of that. So it's a conservation measure. And one of the reasons I was asked to be a federal duck stamp judge, this is quite a long time ago, was to get birders more interested in buying the stamp. If you're a hunter, you have to. If a birder, it's optional, but also by buying the stamp, you get passage into the national wildlife refuges here. I used mine over the weekend when I went to Parker River National Wildlife Refuge, and I was participating in October Big Day, which is that big global event. So I was asked to be a duck stamp judge, which is a big honor. You are sequestered in Washington, D.C. You sort of wined and dine. You are in the National Press Club. And the contest is really quite amazing. There are people from all over the world who are collectors of the duck stamp, but you're up on a big platform and there's a big audience in front of you. And behind your head is the scores that you give to each picture. So each federal duck stamp is a small piece of art, maybe about this big. People don't realize it. And you go around the room, and then you pick some of the last ones to become the finalists, and then you score them. But one of the things they do is they give you a magnifying glass that's reversed, so that you get to see what one of those paintings of waterfowl looks like as a little stamp. And that's important because there are criteria for those stamps. They want to make sure the waterfowl stands out from the background. You have as a judge, they have very strict rules about everything being biologically correct. All the feathers have to be the number of feathers. There's an expert there to help us. We have different examples of wings and things like that. So it's a great honor. It's teeny bit intimidating because you realize it's a big responsibility, because the people that win practically become instant millionaires. That's why they are very strict. I was with my husband at the time. They sequestered us. We were not allowed to talk to one another about this until the contest was over. So like I said, it's a great honor. And one of my jobs there was to promote birders buying the duck stamps as a conservation measure.
Okay. And the Stokes Field Guide to the Birds of North America, when did that come out?
Well, that was a while ago, and then there's an East and West versions. I call this Big Red because it's big and thick with 3,400 photos and covered 854 species. But that came out around let's see, 2010, I believe, and then in the mid 2013, the East and West guides came out, and and then right now the Finch book. So this is a Western, the Eastern version of that, because the other one is really big to carry around. And then this one that we're going to talk about today is actually my 36th book. And this one was done with my wonderful co-author, Matt Young.
And that's a great segue to get onto Matt. And by the way, I did say that I may have been a kid when that first book came out. Actually, 10 years ago, I felt like a kid, so that'll do me.
We're all kids.
Exactly. Now let me turn to Matt. Matt is no stranger to ink conservation. We've actually been on twice before, again talking about finches. And Matt and I actually go a long way. Lillian and I don't think we've met, but Matt and I have known each other for the best part of 15 years. He is the founder and board president of the Finch Research Network, also known as FERN. And as a social worker, is it ASA social worker or as a social worker? Anyway,
yeah.
ASA.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
What's that?
What's ASA?
Are you saying? Did you say ASA?
Yeah.
That might be a typo in there? Then I guess I don't know. I don't know what you're reading exactly. So
okay. Let me start again.
Okay. Yes.
As a social worker, Matthew has also worked for 12 years with special needs populations at the William George Agency for Children's Services. Additionally, Matt has worked at the Cornell Lab for Ornithology for 15 years. I think that's when I first met you, focusing on golden winged warblers, a bird I still yet to see, voices of Hawaiian birds, in fact, most of them I haven't seen, and the Merlin Bird ID app. He also was also project lead on the Cornell Lab's first eruptive finch survey in 1999. Widely known as a preeminent authority on finches of North America, Matthew has written finch species accounts for breeding bird atlases and birds of the world, and has published several papers on finches and the red crossbill vocal complex. So you've earned your salt. You've earned your what's the thing now? You've earned your badges. Yeah, definitely.
Yes, we've earned our badges. We have some street cred.
Exactly. And where are you and how are you, by the way?
I'm good. I'm actually just east of Portland, New York, so I'm between Syracuse and Ithaca. And that is also obviously in the east. So, but I'm good. It's a pleasure to be on with you. It's always a pleasure to see your smiling face too.
Well, likewise, and it's easy to smile with you guys. So we're here to talk about finches of USA and Canada. I think maybe without any further ado, let's have a look at what you are talking about. Let's find out more about the book, and then perhaps we can have a chat afterwards, because it's quite an interesting subject. I think that you you guys have produced the first book on finches of the United States and Canada. I mean, in terms of this kind of volume, is that right?
That's
That's correct.
correct.
That's correct. So we have a little program for you today. It's a scaled down version of one of the PowerPoints we've been going around doing for different organizations and Audubon societies, and we'll be at the biggest week in American birding next May to give a program and be keynote speakers. So this is a little tiny taste of what's in the book and all about finches, and all the material in this little program is taken from the book, and the photos are included in the book, almost all of them, and we have photo credits at the end. So Finches of the United States and Canada, the first guide, complete guide to all the finches of the United States and Canada, and we're just absolutely thrilled about that and thrilled to be able to be the first. Matt? Next. Matt's driving. We'll tell you a little bit about the backstory. How did we get together? The main breeding finches, there are 18 of them, finch eruptions. The vagrant finches, very rare birds. The finches of Hawaii, very important. And feeding and attracting finches, which everybody loves to feed birds. Research and conservation, and how you can help. Next. The backstory. So how did Matt and I meet? Well, it started for me with Red Cross bills 8/7/2020 during the pandemic. I lived in southern New Hampshire at that time, and a group of Red Cross bills was coming to the Nature Center, the Harris Center for Conservation Education. There's a picture of it at the bottom, to the parking lot every day to get grit. So my friend, the former director, contacted me and said, Lillian, get over here. The Red Cross bills are here. So I went the next day, ran over there, and there they were reliably every morning. And I was able to photograph them and study them and video them and record their calls. I became more and more engrossed with them. I feel like I sort of bonded with the flock. I'd sleep at night hearing their chip, chip, chip calls in my sleep. And I think I felt after a while that I was really part of them. I really bonded with them. One of the things that you should know about Red Cross bills is that when you see them, it's important to record them. So with my cell phone, I recorded them, and I sent the recording to, at first the wrong Matt, but to my co-author now, Matt Young, who's a leading person to decode their call types. Think of Red Cross bills as living in tribes in different areas of the country. Each tribe speaks its own unique secret language. They don't really relate to the other tribes. So the average birder, it's quite hard to tell one tribe call from another. With practice, you can learn, but what you do is you record the calls and then you send them to a finch expert. In this case, it was my to-be co-author, Matt Young. Next. Who has his own. Matt has his
We
own.
went too far there.
Yeah, there's
We went
Matt's
too far.
Matt's recruitment and his own backstory. Matt?
So I think I've said this on the show before, but just to make a long story short, I finished a degree. My undergraduate was in hydrogeology, meteorology, and I realized at the end of that program, my undergraduate degree, I wasn't going to go into that field. At the time, the most of the jobs in that field were something called LUST. It was the assessment of leaky underground storage tanks. I said, nah, I don't think this is for me, although I still love, learning about geology. But anyway, at the end of that semester in 95, June 95, May 95, I bought a pair of binoculars, I bought a car, went to a Grateful Dead show, drove west to this location in the upper left there. That's Lower Falls, Yellowstone. I went to the falls with my binoculars, and a flock of red crossbills flew in, started feeding above me. And, you don't know these seminal moments at the time that they happen. But amazingly, my whole kind of worldview shifted. That's really, the power of birds can really shift one's trajectory and mindset. And here I am now, this is what, almost 30 years later. We launched the Finch Research Network, as you mentioned in the beginning, David, And we, now put out the Finch forecast here in the Eastern United States. And we have an evening grosbeak project going and a research project going and a crossbill project going and so on. Back to Lillian here.
So to sum it up, there was a pandemic raging, a super flight, and that's when all the eruptive finches leave the north in Canada due to a lack of food. They all came down. The red crossbills were some of those that I met, and our story is that our paths crossed over red crossbills, and that crossing became the genesis of the Stokes Guide to Finches of the United States and Canada. Next. Main breeding finches, there are 18. Next. American goldfinch. Who doesn't love American goldfinches in the United States and Canada? Because they're top feeder birds. Their buttery yellow beauty is on every bag of finch seed in the $2.2 billion wild bird feeding industry here. The yellow actually is interesting. They molt twice, but in their breeding plumage, they get very yellow. The yellow comes from dietary carotenoids. They don't produce it themselves. What's important about that is the brightest males are the best at getting food. So the female American goldfinch sits on the nest about 95% of her time. She's fed by the male. She prefers the brightest males, and that's because the brightest males are the best at getting food. So if you're going to sit all the time on the nest and get fed by it, you better pick the guy that's really good at getting food. It's a top quality guy. So the one interesting thing about this book is that we tried to marry interesting information about even the common birds and take you deeper, as well as giving you top information that will appear to finch experts. So the sex ratio, people think they know American goldfinches. Guess again, the sex ratio is more males than females. And that a very unusual thing can happen rarely with them. It's called polyandry, and it's a mating system. It only occurs 4.9% of the time, and it occurs when a female will mate with a male, and then about partway through the nestling phase, she'll leave him and go and mate with a second male, and then have a brood with him. So it's the payoff pot of gold for all involved, because the first male gets to breed. The second male also gets to breed. And remember, there are more males than females. So he gets to breed also. And for her, she gets to breed twice. Next. European goldfinch, fascinating. European goldfinch is now considered one of the main breeding finches and new to that status. So one of the things that happened to me while writing this book is that a lot of magical experiences with finches happened. This was one of them. I was going to write the chapter on European goldfinch, and I looked at the Massachusetts bird listserv that morning and said, a European goldfinch is being seen in Massachusetts at the Lexington Community Gardens. I looked at the map and it said Lillian Road. I said, you can't make this stuff up. I'm over there. The finches keep calling me and I keep answering. What's happened is that in a lot of the United States, you might see a European goldfinch, but it's considered an escaped bird. And often that's true. But in the Western Great Lakes, from Chicago to Milwaukee, they become sustained breeders. Julie Craves and Nicholas Anish in 2023 reviewed 7,000 records and found, in fact, that they have been breeding in the Western Great Lakes since 2003. So therefore, they've earned their status now as a naturalist sustained breeding, main breeding finches. A lot of where these birds came from were releases. And when you look at the book, the way it's organized, we have complete information about, breeding and identification and food and eruptions, conservation status, things like that. But we also have, as an introduction to each main breeding finch account, something called a quick take, which I wrote. Think of them as creative essays designed to engage people with stories. People learn in a lot of different ways. one of the ways they learn often best is by storytelling. So I told a wide variety of different stories. Sometimes the story also has a quote you can see under this is the beginning of the Evening Grosbeak chapter under that beautiful male Evening Grosbeaks. But the quick take story is about a mythical, female Evening Grosbeak. There's a couple of quotes from the quick take. She flew in spring 2021 and stuck her landing on the white spruce branch. It goes on to talk about how she was breeding successfully, but then she suddenly looked up toward the sun, which had turned eerily orange. Minuscule particles of burned forest drifted down on her nest. It ends with, will there be continuing dawns for evening grosbeaks or a final sunset? Unfortunately, that year that there were terrible forest fires. This is an example of climate change being very destructive. There were terrible forest fires, 1,000 raging near her in the Ontario province that year. Matt, more on grosbeaks.
So as you see on my cap here, if everybody can see that, I got an evening grosbeak on my cap, and we kind of wanted to add this bird because it's closely related to across Eurasia. There's several different call types, like with red crossbill, which is also known as common crossbill across Eurasia. And I just wanted to play this is a figure of the spectrograms of how the different voices look in an audio spectrographic analysis here in the States on these 5 different call types. And the 2 northern ones, which is type 1 and type 3. Type 3 is the eastern one. Type 1 is the one that's eruptive or irregularly moves throughout the West. They sound pretty different. And the same kind of thing we believe is also going on with the hawfinch, which is a Copothrastus finch as well. So let me just play type 1. Kind of a pure tone whistle. Doesn't sound that evening grosbeak like to me in some ways. And then type 3 is our eastern one. It has a much more burry kind of burry ringing quality to it. Almost like sleigh bells in a way. And you can see the spectrogram there looks different, a fair bit different than type 1 as well. This was also, David saw this bird with me, big flock of them in New York back, I don't know, it was around 2015, I think it was, 2016, somewhere around there, I think it was. Big flocks of red poles and evening grosbeaks we saw together. Just to get into kind of eruptions and what drives eruptions, there is, eruptions do, from my understanding in the literature, talking to researchers across Eurasia, they do, eruptions of a lot of the finches do take place. It doesn't seem like the science is as far advanced as far as knowing what drives them. But a lot of times it's kind of foreseed for a lot of them, particularly obviously the crossbills are the most obligate conifer seed eaters because they have that specialized bill for feeding on, grabbing the seed out of the cones. But a lot of the other finches also kind of key in on conifer seed. Deciduous seed also drives some of the eruptions, particularly for the red pole, which has now been lumped. I'll get to that in a second. But also, you have pine grosbeak, which is found, across the world. Palearctic is driven a lot of times by fruit crops. Pine grosbeak, we have 5 different subspecies here in the United States and Canada. There are 4 more in Eurasia. Primarily, the one that erupts here in the east is the subspecies Lucara, the one there. It's the boreal one that comes down here in the east, and the one that we do a prediction in the finch forecast. Then there's Californica. It's the only one of the bunch that actually does not have spruce in the habitat. It is in a fur zone in California in the Sierra Nevada. Then there's a Rocky Mountain bird. Then there's kind of a coastal bird, and then there's a bird on Queen Charlotte Island, which is known as Haida Gwaii now. Redpoll, which has been in the news, the Europeans, they kind of had this lumped even before we were onto it, but the AOS just lumped all of the redpolls as well. They're all known as redpoll now. There's still subspecies status. But the fascinating thing, a lot of people don't know this, we cover this in the book. The story of this actually started, at least a lot of people don't know, it started at my house in Portland in 2013, where I had a ridiculous flock of red polls. Not a big flock. It was only about 75 birds. Showed up at the house. I invited Mason and Taylor out, and they actually banded some birds, took some blood, started this study. One thing has led to another, and here we are now with them lumped. It's basically a chromosomal inverted super gene that controls for the look. These birds, particularly hoary redpoll, as you go north, kind of presents in that frostier, hoary look. Across the pond is known as the Arctic redpoll, at least the hoary was. And then the red crossbill complex, known as common crossbill across Eurasia. And this is the one where, I was a finch person really to begin with, but it was the biology of this bird that really, where all the science was at most interesting in the finch complex. And then people started recording them and sending me recordings, mostly here across North America, but I do get recordings from crossbill recordings or crossbill, events in the field from people across Europe as well. Interesting complex though. You have these call type phenomenon. There's 12 here in North America. There's upwards of anywhere from 16 to 26, I believe, across Eurasia. And what I just want to touch upon in the book, these are kind of new, never been done before. The maps were new and never done before, but are these foraging charts to kind of take people through the year on how crossbills switch their diet. To a crossbill, it's really all about what is on the menu. And to a crossbill, the menu cycle year or the cone cycle year starts in around July 1. And this also can be applied across Europe and Eurasia. It's not quite the same. They can breed, from what I understand in the literature. They can breed a little bit more year round, but they mainly breed in 2 cycles here in the States and Canada. But they kind of 3 different life history strategies. There's some that have a more specialized approach, which one of them is Cassia crossbill, was raised to species status here just a few years ago. It was the 9th one of the 12 that were described. So they got the number that they were described in chronological order. And it really lives in a very narrow area in 2 isolated mountain ranges in Idaho. There's no tree squirrels there. So there's no competitors necessarily driving cone evolution. Whereas if you take the squirrels out of the equation, crossbills will actually drive cone evolution. So there was a scientist, Dr. Benkman, that was kind of looking at this. Let me just go back there. That was looking at this, and he asked himself the question: could he find a mountain range east of the Rockies that had no tree squirrels? And he ended up finding this different sounding call type of red crossbill. They didn't really move around a whole heck of a lot. They assortatively mated with the correct call type. So, caches were breeding with caches, and not hybridizing with type 2 and 5 that were coming in and out of that area. But then there's also and you utilize just this local variant of lodgepole pine. And so they're highly specialized. And type 5 is also one that is kind of specialized. But then there's the nomadic ones that are tracking conifer cone crops across North America. Type 2 fits that. It can be found from the West Coast to the East Coast pretty much. And then we have these kind of more generalist types here in the East, type 1 and 12 in particular. And I showed type 12 there. on how it also conifer switches through the year. Oh, we went backwards. There we go forwards. So I'm going to play here type 12, which we just described. The Finch Research Network just described this. It's the northeastern call type. Kind of a kip, kip, kip. Has a squeaky kind of harsh quality to it. Here's type 4, which Bankman described as a Douglas fir specialist, but again, it is found from on both sides of the coast from year to year to some degree. It's mostly found out west, but it does erupt eastward, and we had the biggest eruption ever on record, at least in the last 25 years of this call type. Kind of a plick plick. Pretty different sounding to my ears, but I understand that I've listened to a lot more crossbills than most of the people out there. And white wing crossbill, and again, getting back to that kind of conifer switching dynamic, crossbills here across North America primarily nest in 2 cycles. June or July to September, utilizing newly developed cone crops, but then January to April, so they molt in fall. And then in January to April, they'll start to utilize the remaining cone crops, but then switch to these pines, these hard pines that will hold their seed the longest through the cone cycle here. So you can see on this here foraging chart, they're utilizing spruces and tamaracks in the beginning of that cone cycle year, and then towards the end, unlike with red crossbill, which are utilizing pines, white wing will key in on black spruce because it is a semi-serotinous species, meaning that it holds the cone the longest because the cone is actually encased in a gel, and that doesn't open up. The scales won't open up on black spruce until you get into the springtime, when temperatures start to heat up. Vagrant finches.
Vagrant finches are certainly part of the book. There are 9 covered. One of the ways I tell their story is by through the eyes of a woman who won the North American Big Year in 2017, and she went to Attu and found a common rose finch that was number 643 on her list, and I think she came out with 817 species and won the Big Year, the first woman to win the Big Year. A lot of our vagrant finches are found in the Alaska islands, especially Attu. My definition: vagrant, the wrong bird in the wrong place at the wrong time that has the potential to send birders into mega rarity delirium. Don't you love it when you get a mega? All of us, if there was a mega now, I'd be running out the door somewhere. So very exciting. It stimulates us. And then some of these birds are, here are some of the vagrants that we cover. Brambling, a biggie, many records across the US and Canada, but they're given numbers about how rare they are. 3 is that they show up rarely, but they breed, you can find them every year. There was a record 336 flock on Shemya Island in 2023. They've nested on Attu next. Next vagrant, hawfinch. Don't you love those big, incredible birds? I love the way this bird looks. Those big, related to evening grosbeak, those big, powerful bill. It has something like 50 kilograms of power to crack open something like a cherry seed. It's Eurasian species. One of the coolest recounts on eBird is one rode a container ship from China to Santa Barbara, California. The crew kept feeding these birds. He said, I kept thistle seed, millet suet, put peanut butter out for the hitchhikers. Not only was it a hawfinch, but they had a little mini flock of a hawfinch, a brambling, and a rustic bunting, all rode the ship all the way across the Pacific and were fed. Eurasian bullfinch. This is the actual photo on the left of that gorgeous male, a quite beautiful, beautiful bird. I love that one. St. Paul Island, it came from that photo in 2022. And I looked up them recently on eBird. There was a record from 10/1/24 just recently, again on St. Paul Island. Next. Feeding and attracting finches, a biggie. Like I said, 91 million people in the United States feed and observe finches and other birds in their backyard, finches and wildlife in their backyard. 91 million, according to the latest statistics. I wrote a poem about it. Look, flashing gold and black, see wings descending. Watch, flocking seed seekers, hear chirping sleigh bells. Notice evening grosbeaks feeding. Realize you forgot to worry about anything. Next. And that is the feeling of health and wellness you get when you look at gorgeous birds. It's what connects us. It doesn't mean matter if it's an urban bird or a rural bird. We seek and need and strive for this, and it provides enormous benefit. New studies out all the time. One from King's College in London, 2022, improved mental well-being for people, including people who were depressed. Another study said people who lived in neighborhoods with more birds, shrubs, and trees had less stress, anxiety, and depression. It's the antidote for what ails us. And Lord knows in today's world, there's plenty of stress and anxiety. Next. Doesn't matter. Feeding finches, we have a big section in the book about that. The right feeder, the right seed. I've written a lot of books about feeding birds. And finch safety as well, keeping the feeders clean to prevent disease, and also keeping from window hits, which is a big problem with birds. You can put up decals and stripes and other things and special coverings for your glass. Next. And gardening, huge. I'm a huge gardener. I've been to a lot of the great gardens in England. That's a picture of my property there in New Hampshire when I lived in New Hampshire. I had big gardens and tons of finches, but it doesn't mean you have to do that. It could be just a little, I have a condo now, just a little yard, a pot of flowers, a lot of those composites, which finches being seed eaters love. And some of them are berry eaters also, so don't forget that. Huge part of health and wellness, both feeding and gardening for birds. Next. Hawaiian honey creepers. Again, sometimes I just wrote a poem to capture things. The beating wings, this is the story of Hawaii honey creepers and what happened. The beating wings onward and onward to strive and search and reach through millennia, dreaming of paradise awaiting them, going beyond the known limits of flight, arriving, achieving radiation, forms changing, becoming new bird species. Paradise lost, found, but eventually lost. Boo-hoo, but all is not lost, which Matt will tell you about. Matt?
Yeah, so the amazing thing about, this group of birds is, about the thought is about 5 to 7 million years ago, a common ancestor of a Eurasian rose finch, which, kind of looks like our, house finch, purple finch, Cassin's finch, wandered off, maybe multiple events, landed in Hawaii, and adaptively radiated out to 50 plus species. Just an amazing adaptive radiation, and a lot of actually adaptively radiated to look like birds that don't look like what we grew up thinking finch was. A lot of times we thought finch, when you had the morphological species concept, we followed kind of like what looked like one another. And the thought was, a finch was a bird with a conical bill used for cracking seed. But as you can see there at the top, the Evie, which is the one with that long decurved bill, is actually a nectivorous species. It's trying to get nectar from inside flowers, and it is actually a fringillidae finch. And out of, a lot of these, the Palila in the middle is the one that really only looks like a finch. The only one left actually that really looks like a finch. There's only, unfortunately, we're down to 16 species. Akakiki just basically went extinct functionally extinct in the wild. Here's the Palila. It's a specialist on Mamani seeds. It's confined to a very small area. It's related to bullfinches in Europe and pine grosbeaks here in the United States. And again, it looks kind of like a typical, like what we thought finch looked like. Then the Akiapula, which is just an amazing, amazing bird. We're only covering a couple of these here. That bill actually kind of it functions separately, but in unison with one another. So the bottom bill, which is straight, is used for tapping a tree, kind of like a woodpecker, to find where the larvae is. And then where they find the larvae, the top bill then scoops out the larvae or any kind of insects that it might find. And it has an extra bone to kind of help them kind of work that bill together. The unfortunate thing is there's this conservation crisis there. There's only 16 left of the 50 plus species. There's this house mosquito, Helix mosquito, that is invading higher, especially as our climate warms. It's invading higher areas of the islands, and when it bites the honey creepers, none of them really have any defense against this avian malaria that they get, except for the amakihi. It's the only one that has formed any kind of defense. Unfortunately, they have basically been decimated. But there is a multi-agency partnership, Birds Not Mosquitoes, that is headed up by the American Bird Conservancy. Lots of different organizations, including Finch Research Network, is in on this. They're utilizing mosquito birth control, basically. They're introducing the male mosquitoes they're basically the male mosquitoes get this incompatible Wolbachia bacteria. And then when they're released back into the wild with this incompatible Wolbachia bacteria and it mates with the female, because it's incompatible, when the female then lays the eggs, they're infertile eggs. So the idea is it's like like I said, a birth control, mosquito birth control. The populations of the mosquitoes will hopefully go down as close to zero as possible, and then the honey creepers will hopefully have a chance to rebound. Just some last kind of research and conservation topics to cover, across the Fringillidae complex. Vocalization is very important in this group. A lot of times the females sing. Sometimes there's mimicry in some of the species, but some of the species don't mimic. There's this odd, like, skewed sex ratio. With more females than males, how does driving affect breeding for particularly like crossbills? And then you have evening grosbeaks decline 92%. There's my collaborator, colleague, David Yenny there, that the Finch Research Network and several organizations are working on this tagging, banding project where we're putting satellite tags on evening grosbeaks to try to find out what has led to the 92% decline. And with that, we would like to thank all the photo credits. But thanks again. That's basically what we have to kind of give people a little bit of an idea of what we're covering in the book.
Right, incredible. I mean, I think that the whole of this book is just rammed with so much information, which I think appeals to a whole spectrum of people, not just ornithologists, but also people who are learning about birds. I mean, there's a lot to unpack with that presentation you guys gave, so thank you very much for that. We've literally got like 15 minutes to talk through all of it, but I just want to say a couple of things. Firstly, goldfinch, European goldfinch. I'm really disappointed that it's become naturalized in US. I hate when birds or any animal for that matter are introduced to areas where they shouldn't be. I'm not sure what effect it's having on ecologically with the biodiversity, but
I can answer that. I can speak to that shortly. The study on them finds that they are not hybridizing at all with American goldfinches. So they're keeping an eye on it, but right now, mostly what they eat is the introduced weeds from their native lands, like a burdock is where I photographed that bird. But I agree with you, there's huge problems in caged birds. Chaffinches, European goldfinches being released all over, and this has been going on often for centuries. So I hear you there, but I just want you to know that the Julie Craves, Nicholas Anich article does speak to that and say right now they don't think that it's affecting adversely some of the native birds.
That's good. That's good to hear. I mean, I actually saw a goldfinch once in Los Angeles. I remember walking down the street and hearing a goldfinch singing. I'm thinking, am I dreaming? and I looked up and there was a goldfinch singing in a tree, so I was a bit disappointed. Funny enough, I wrote an article the other day for Birdwatching magazine in the UK on American goldfinch, and
Oh, cool.
I was quite surprised to learn that the American goldfinch, in fact, it is a siskin, whereas the Eurasian or European goldfinch is not actually a siskin. It's a different subfamily, so I didn't know that. So that was incredible. The evening grosbeak, I think, is a wonderful looking bird, huge. And I remember, as Matt said, being with him, watching a million redpolls swarming over someone's front yard, and seeing this a couple of evening grosbeaks, and they were point blank range. And I remember being excited, saying, "Matt, look, look, look." And I got my camera out to take a picture, and I thought this would be the money shot. My battery's dead, and that's the last time I've ever seen an evening grosbeak. Never seen one since. So,
One of these days again.
yeah, I'll have to definitely.
We'll get
Yeah,
you
been
over
there
here
with the
again,
dead
that's right.
camera battery. Haven't we all been with the dead camera battery for the money shot? Oh, I took a lot of pictures in the book, and oh yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, it's terrible. You touched on Redpole. I mean, I was reading the Redpole entries in your book, and it's quite fascinating how, they're split and then they're lumped, they're split, they're lumped, and there doesn't seem now to be much difference between them all, even though they kind of look different. But then I remember being with Matt. I don't know if you remember this, Matt. We were looking at all the different types of red poles. Some are very dark. Some are, we would even you were scratching your head when it came to identifying some of them specifically.
Yeah,
There's
there's a fine line. Some of the hoary red poles, or what we knew as hoary red poles, aren't that straightforward. And that's why there was a scoring system for a long time of, like, looking at the shape of the bill, looking at how frosty it was, looking at the undertail coverts, looking at whether the roof was streaked or not streaked. So yeah, the young birds are tricky, but now they're all lumped together. But I still encourage everybody to identify the subspecies, because it's a beautiful group of birds. I
yeah.
mean, just they almost look tropical in a sense, and that they come from the Arctic is just pretty mind blowing. I remember the first time I saw one, and it was just like, oh my God! I mean, you see a nice rosy colored, chested male, and you're just, yeah, just gorgeous.
It was my holy grail during the superflood. I wanted to photograph all the eruptive finches, and the last one in my holy grail was to try to photograph a hoary redpoll. That story is, again, one of the quick takes in the book in front of the hoary redpoll. And now it's sort of instructive as to what visually we see about these birds and how we understand them now. And it's because of all the advances in genetics. I mean, genetically, they're pretty much the same, except for an inversion on a chromosomal inversion, which controls the ones that are the frostier looking, and they actually have an advantage because up in their frosty landscape, they're paler, and those are the ones that do well and continue to mate with their own up there and survive. So, but it's all about genetics now. People are constantly saying, well, what makes a finch a finch? What's a finch? We used to think it was, well, birds that had conical bills and ate seeds, and now we understand that from much deeper genetic levels. But they're, as Matt said, they're beautiful birds. An interesting problem as authors that we faced was that we knew this lump might occur, but we had to write this book. And we were going down to the wire to publication. They hadn't made a decision yet. And we sent the book off in April to be published. And the lump came in July. But what we did in the book, and people will find this out, is we have all the different subspecies, but we labeled them redpoll complex was our workaround to deal with that.
That's good thinking.
Yeah,
Good thinking.
glad we covered the way we did, actually. I think it still kind of retains their individual beauty a bit more. Um, but obviously we knew the change was coming, or we thought the change was coming. Same thing with crossbill. We did the same thing because Cassia crossbill is a species that's a bit in flux, because it's 40% of that habitat burned in Idaho 4 years ago, and since then, some Cassia crossbills have now started to turn up in Colorado and California. in Wyoming. Finches are, I mean, we like to put things in boxes, and I'm always, the birds will figure this out. We just need to kind of try to observe it in the most unbiased way possible, and then tell the story for what it is.
What
So,
does the average birder in America and Canada think of the redpolls? Do they kind of scratch their heads thinking, is that a, or do they think common redpoll, or sorry, common crossbill, or red crossbill?
okay, you're asking about crossbill. Say this, it's become, this is, and I did this a lot when I was at the Lab of O. It is the most highly recorded bird in the Macaulay Library at Cornell. There's 30,000 plus recordings. So even though it's nichey, there's a lot of people out there now recording red crossbills, almost to the point where, the vice president of firm, Tim Spar, and I last year, we almost had a broken workflow because we were inundated with crossbill recordings last year. So there's a lot of enthusiasm around it. But I think, people, it depends on, are you somebody that loves to get into the weeds and find the differences, or are you just like, it's just another red cross bill? That varies a lot. And we kind of tried to offer, this book in a way where there was something for the novice or the backyard bird watcher and also the expert. I mean, finches kind of present themselves with unique opportunities because, even there, David, there's everybody kind of has a garden variety of finch species or two in their backyard. But then there's these other finches that are less accessible or are less kind of predictable. So you kind of have some really interesting science going on with those, but then everybody has this accessibility to finches because of the flocking nature and stuff. So it really depends on where you're at. Are you a hardcore birder that wants their type 4 red crossbill, or are you just somebody that's like, oh, there's another red crossbill feeding there?
But
Depends.
what we wanted to do with the book was to make all these finches accessible for everybody, whether you're a backyard bird watcher or just a novice, and to explain who they are and where they are and how you can find them and what's going to happen, and introduce you to the winter finch forecast and know who's coming. Because in fact, most people are in this country, birding, the biggest involvement with birding is, again, that 91 million people who are attached to their feeders, who see finches at their feeders, see birds at their feeders, and that's your first place to encounter them. Even sometimes red crossbills. I lived in New Hampshire. I had white-winged crossbills at my feeder there. It was very exciting.
You said that there's what, 18 species of finch in America and Canada. Is that right? How many
Well,
Four
species?
species, yes. Yep.
there's the main breed. We divided them up into the main breeding finches, and then the vagrants, which are 9, and Hawaii, which was 17, now 16 because one went extinct. So 43.
Yeah, but let's talk about the States for a second and Canada. 18 species, and then you showed us all the vagrants, which is amazing to see. Things like brambling and birds that we in Britain and Europe see on a very regular basis. But it suddenly crossed my mind that of your 18 species of finch, not one has turned up in Europe as a vagrant.
We sure about that?
I'm pretty
Yeah, I
sure.
guess. Well, you got to remember some of those are Palearctic. So I mean, pine grosbeak, red pole, crossbill, white winged crossbill, which is known as two-barred. It's a different subspecies. So it's not quite even 18 species when you boil it down to like how many are unique here to North America compared to Europe and Eurasia. Oh, that's a good question. No goldfinches have showed up over there. Pine siskin, has there ever been? I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. Has pine siskin ever, or a purple finch ever showed up in?
Not
No.
as, not as far as I know, no. So it's interesting. You
Okay.
have all our birds, we can't have any of yours.
Yeah. I don't know.
Give it
That's
a
an
little
interesting
time.
dynamic.
Wait a bit, between the weather and crazy weather and global warming, who knows?
Exactly. Food is a very interesting subject. You've spoke about it at length in your book. I wanted to find out how bird feeding is perceived in North America, or Canada and USA, compared to, say, in Britain, because in the UK, I mean, people feed birds, have always fed birds, but recently there's been a lot of science coming out from some of the NGOs basically saying, you're doing it wrong. You're feeding them the wrong stuff. You know, actually, by feeding them, you are changing their behavior, which is not a good thing. Oh, by feeding them, you're also affecting species that don't come to feeders, but the species that you are feeding are becoming more dominant against those species. Do you have that sort of stuff going on in the USA and Canada?
I can speak a little bit to that because I actually been involved in the bird feeding industry for probably 30 years, at least 25 years, including at one point having licensed products, including consulting and be involved in formulation of mixes and all kinds of other things. I know a lot of the players. I know what's going on. I think, and bird feeding is huge. Like I pointed out, it's a $2.2 billion industry here. I think in the UK, I think I read something recently, it's like a 200 to 300 million pounds a year industry, something like that. And that in the UK, it's been going on a long time, but more ramped up since the 70s, when more people started getting more birds at their feeders because of feeding and perhaps changing things. I think in this country, there's those elements to it, but they're very well studied. I mean, there's huge amounts of information and consolidation, things like Cornell and Project Feeder Watch, which tracks everything, gives good feeding advice, tells how to do it safely, and then keeps records about Project Feeder Watch is great because it tells what birds are where in what areas of the country and how things are being affected. Certainly, there's always, concern about feeding birds and what it does to them, but there are a number of studies that says the birds that are fed, like chickadees and things like that, particularly in very cold weather, in severe winters, the ones that are fed are the ones that actually survive better. So in terms of the fact that so many people are involved so much, and the encouragement often too here is to marry it with habitat and naturalization of habitat and get you involved with, yeah, you're feeding it, but let's talk about what you can do in your yard to create and bring back, get rid of the invasives, bring back natural habitat. Let's join together in communities and towns and stuff like that to rewild America. There's huge things like that I'm a huge gardener too. And like I said, I've been to the Great Gardens and had my own gardens on the Garden Conservancy here. So I think that's kind of a good thing, but it'll always be controversial a bit, and it depends on where you are and what's going on and who's leading the information. I know that the RSPB does a big attempt, I think, to try to help people understand better how to feed birds in a good, more positive way, perhaps.
No, I agree with that. Listen, we could talk all day. I mean, sorry, Matt, you going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think everything that Lillian said there is spot on. I'm actually part-time employed by the bird feeding industry right now myself. And, yeah, I mean, there's a wellness aspect that is important to humans at this point, but as Lillian said, in the northern climates, it has been kind of looked at that it's pretty beneficial to a lot of the backyard birds, but you have to stay on top of cleaning and keeping, the feeders clean and keeping them a
Hygiene.
safe distance.
Yeah.
Yeah, safe distance from a house, from windows as well is super important. Finches tend to actually be susceptible to that because of their social, flocking aspect.
Yes.
So anyway, I think it's an evolving, story and landscape. I
Yes.
know in UK green finches, there's been an issue with trichomoniasis, I believe, which is it's just a matter of keeping them clean. So, but yeah, we can talk about this all day.
Yes, we can. And
That's our-
unfortunately, we can't. I need to ask you both a question and very brief answers each, please. Can you tell me what your favorite finch is? Matt first.
It's hard not to say red crossbill for me, to be honest with you. I mean, all the finches are, I just love, I have a special relationship with all of them. But I think it was solidified this past last winter when, after about a 35-minute experience with a flock of 12 red crossbills, one for some unknown reason other than maybe it recognized me as a crossbill in another life, flew out from about 40 yards away and tried to land on my head. And to this day, I mean, I have a lot of great stories with crossbills and finches. Crossbill, having a crossbill fly out and try to land on your head after 35 minutes with it was just kind of just blew me away. So
Amazing.
always going to be near and dear to my heart.
Amazing. Lillian?
Well, certainly, Red Crossbill's my spark finch. And why could I not love them? It changed my life. I mean, here I was in the pandemic and everybody is, anxious and feeling terrible. And so my friend calls me and says, get over here. The Red Crossbills have come. And it seriously, at the very beginning, I was completely transfixed. I mean, it made me feel so much better during this horrible, lockdown pandemic. And then, of course, it led me to my co-author, and it led me to this book. So it's a totally magical, life-changing. I mean, my first spark bird was I went to a mountaintop and met a bald eagle, and I also had a background in psychiatric social. I was a psychiatric social worker, and I changed 180. And Matt and I both, talk about the wellness power of finches. But then, I was an ornithologist, and here comes those red crossbills, and they totally recruited me. And the first time Matt and I met in person, I'll never forget this. So we were in Western Mass. We were in Western Mass, and we get together, and some guy passes us and said, there's no crossbills in here. He and I, our cars meet, we get out of the car, a flock comes down, lands at our feet. And this big crossbill is 3 feet from us and looking right up at us. That photo is in the book under the red crossbill section. It says, you guys got to do this book.
Yeah, it's probably the same one that landed on Matt's head.
Yeah.
With that, I'd like to thank you both for an absolutely entertaining hour talking about finches. And please show us your book again. There you go. Guys, get out there and get this book. It's a fantastic book, really interesting, full of facts and some lovely prose and poems from Lillian as well. So thank you very much for coming today, guys, and also thank you Zoomers for being here as well. And don't forget, if you are watching this in the future, please like and subscribe, and tell your friends as well. Okay, so thank you very much again. And until we meet again, keep looking up.